Get ready to ride along for another exciting episode of No Driving Gloves, where Derek, John, and Will use over 75 years combined industry knowledge to bring you a bare-knuckled view on the collector car hobby. So let's get rolling. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of No Driving Gloves. Today you just have John. This is the beginning of the interview shows that we've been speaking of. Today we're going to be joined by Jordan Towns. She's kind of a do-everything girl, in my opinion. I really respect her. I've known her for almost a decade. She autocrosses, and I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and probably let her tell you everything she does, because the list could go on almost for hours just with how she occupies her life. And this is somebody who's just beginning her life. I'm jealous. I'm 45, and I think she has it together more than I do. But Jordan, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe give a brief resume?
Yeah, sure. So I have been autocrossing, which is how I know John, but I've been autocrossing, I believe, since 2006. So about 11 years. Yeah, I got my 10-year SCCA pin the other day, but autocross with the Sports Car Club of America. Started doing national events, I believe, in 2010, and most recently attended the Nationals Pro Solo Finale and National Championships in Lincoln, Nebraska. Other things I do, my actual career, I'm a veterinarian. I graduated from vet school in 2012, and I worked in general practice and emergency practice for about 5 years. And I just recently started a residency to become a veterinary clinical pathologist, which essentially means I try to do the advanced diagnostic tests, all the tests that you think of that, get sent out to an outside lab. We're the ones that staff that outside lab. So also working on a PhD. So I'll be doing some research in the next 5 to 6 years and trying to get that underway. And that's kind of my career path right now. Other things, I am a NRA certified pistol instructor, and I enjoy specifically teaching women how to shoot pistols just because I feel like women, like the less intimidating atmosphere of having a female teacher, or at least some women do. So I like being able to facilitate that. I do sing in a choir as often as I can. When I was living in Birmingham, I was singing in a choir pretty routinely, a church choir, but now that I've moved, it's a little harder to get back there, but I try to as often as I can. I like to dabble in the arts a little bit. I actually went to the Alabama School of Fine Arts in visual arts, so that was a career path opportunity for me at some point, but then I decided it wasn't exactly the right thing, but I do still enjoy arts. And I'm also a fitness instructor. I like to teach spin classes specifically. So I think that's enough of the hobbies for now. But yeah, I like to try to keep myself occupied.
Like I say, I don't know how you do it. I tinker with cars at work and play parts manager at work, and I do a podcast, and I think I'm too busy. And you've just listed about 6 full-time jobs, and being a PhD student, I know adds probably 3 more even to that list. And I'd forgotten some of the things that you do, especially the art. I've seen some of your drawings on social media and that, and I mean, everything you seem to do is good. And one of the reasons we'll try to rotate back around to that, but the one of the big reasons that I wanted to have you on at this time of the year is your autocrossing career. I guess you started in 2006. I kind of supported somebody in 2008, 2009 while they autocrossed, and then I decided, well, do I want to get into it in Birmingham? And I had my Caterham 7 at the time, which was a cool car, and even had a CRX, I think, at the time. So I had 2 pretty good autocross cars, and did I want to do it? I needed somebody to push me over the edge, so I think I posted on probably the SCCA forum. Did anybody want to drive my Caterham and help instruct me for a day? And some crazy girl stepped up, and I go, well, I'll go ahead and do it with a girl. I'll feel less intimidated and won't be overshown. Well, that was wrong. So kind of we spent the day together and talked, and I think had a good time. I knew you were beyond my abilities when you complained about the rear fenders of the car being just a touch wider than the nose or a touch narrower and caused you to clip some cones. And so, and I think shortly thereafter I exited the autocross scene, and we've just stayed in touch like a lot of people do on social media. But I've watched your career, and over the years you've grown more and more successful and got out of that local scene, correct me if I'm wrong anywhere, and have participated in nationals. For the longest time, you did it with a 2002 or 2003 Toyota Celica, I believe, and
Yes, yeah, the 2002 Celica GTS. That's a fun car. I actually still have it. So
yeah, never get rid of those cars. If you can, don't ever get rid of
no.
those cars, because I sit back and go, I wish I would have never sold this one and that one, and you've kind of retired that car, I gather, and now you're running a Subaru, correct?
Yeah, we've got a 2015 Subaru WRX. Essentially, the progression, I started with the Celica because that was my car, which I wasn't the most educated at setting up cars at the time, but I did the best I could, and I got some shocks for it, and was street class legal, or at the time it was stock class in SCCA terminology, but autocrossed it, took it to a couple of national events, and then really what happened after that, I wanted to I had always wanted to do more with the autocross hobby. Started off locally, and some of the guys after, a year or so were like, "Hey, you're actually getting pretty decent. I think it's time to start looking into, getting some decent tires and really working on developing your skills." So I tried to get, some of the more experienced guys to ride with me and kind of coach me, and that really helped a lot. Started traveling to other local events like Atlanta. Atlanta has always been a large site with a lot of national caliber drivers, so that helped as well. And then I believe it was in 2012, well, I discovered this thing called Pro Solo, which is an offshoot of autocross. And for anybody that's unfamiliar with Pro Solo, I don't know, does everybody know what autocross is on this forum, or should I explain what that is too?
I was going to do a recap here in a second, but you go ahead because you are the expert.
Okay, so autocross is essentially it's cones set up as a course on a large area of pavement, which is usually a big parking lot or an airfield or something like that. And it's individual, so you're not wheel to wheel. It's timed. And so everybody makes a few runs at the course and, tries to get the best time. And if you hit a cone, you're penalized 2 seconds. So it's pretty significant if you hit a cone. There are several classes loosely categorized into street or stock class, which is minimal modifications. They pretty much allow shocks and wheels and tires as long as they're 200 tread wear. You can change out the exhaust from the catback, and I believe that's it. But then you've got street touring, which allows for more suspension modifications, a little bit of ECU tuning, things like that. Still has to be on street tires at 200 tread wear or greater. And then you get into street prepared, street modified, starts allowing for heavier modifications, engine changes, things like that. And those are typically on our compound or race tires. And then you get into prepared and modified. Modified is like people that have built the car from the ground up. So I have tended towards street or street touring class, although I have driven some cars in prepared. And I've also driven a Formula SAE car, which was super fun. Essentially, that's autocross in a nutshell. At national events, they're generally 2-day events, two different courses, and you get 3 runs at each course. So they take your best time on both days and combine them, and then whoever has the best time of both days combined is the winner. In pro solo, it's a little bit different. You still have the courses, but you actually have mirroring courses. You have a drag start. So you launch actually against another person, but you're never actually wheel to wheel. You're racing them on a mirroring course. Pretty awesome. So your reaction time is factored into the overall time. And so it's about getting a good start, getting a good launch, and driving the course well. You get 6 runs at each side, so a total of 12 runs over 2 days. The best time of both sides is added together, and that determines the winner. Based upon those results, there is then a tournament that occurs on the second day, and it's single elimination. Two competitors go up at a time. You each run one course, you swap sides, you run the other course, and then whoever it's essentially bracket racing. Whoever's closest to the time that they set during class competition is the winner. That actually is probably the most exciting part of autocross. Even as a spectator sport, it's people get really into it. It's really fun. Getting back to the original story, that is actually what intrigued me to go beyond what I had been doing. I had essentially been going to mostly local events and the occasional national event up to that point. And then a friend had tipped me off, hey, you should check out these pro solo events. At my first solo nationals in 2011, I had gotten there early enough to see the year end pro solo event, because it's usually done the weekend before national championships. And I had gotten in early just to chill out and, see the sights and kind of get a feel for nationals, which are in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a huge event. It's actually the largest motorsports event, participation wise, in the world. And so I wanted to go up there and see what it was all about and have a few days to hang out before I actually had to compete. And I got there early enough to see the pro solo that happens the weekend before, and it was amazing. And so that next year, I was like, I have to try to get to one of these events. Unfortunately, there's not many close to Alabama. So the closest one I found was Ohio. That's when I started looking for anybody in my local region or anybody that I knew that was actually going to this event so I could drive with them. That's when I found Dennis, who is now my boyfriend, but at the time he was just another guy who, autocrossed, and I had met him a few times. And he said, well, I'll be going. And he has a Mazda RX-8 that was in street touring X class. And so I said, well, I'll come up there and drive it, and, I'll see what this pro solo thing's all about, and we'll kind of go from there. That was the start of, I mean, if it wasn't an addiction before, it was an addiction at that point. That was the most fun I've ever had in autocross. And we actually went a few times before because he lived, fairly close. So he's like, let's go to the drag strip and practice this whole start thing because you're going to want to know how to do this before you get there. And there are practice starts the day before the event, but I wasn't going to be able to get up there early enough to do that thanks to my work schedule. We went to a drag strip, took a few practice runs, and then that was the only seat time I had in the car at the time. And I went up to Ohio. It was actually in Toledo, Ohio in 2012. After my first set of runs, I was actually leading the class, which was like, I was ecstatic. I did not end up winning. After the next, you get 4 sets of runs, and then the afternoon you get another 4, and then Sunday morning you get your last 4. And I was ultimately overtaken by some really awesome drivers. and I ended up, I think, fourth out of like 12. I was hooked. It was over at that point, and pro solo has become a really big thing. Now we essentially plan our entire national schedule around the pro solos just to try to get experience, and also in order to qualify for the finale at the end of the year, you have to have a certain number of points. So, we try and make sure prioritize those events and get the number of points because it's too much fun and you don't want to miss out on the year-end event. So, that's how that happened.
Kind of a gentle progression from 2006 to all of a sudden the radical change. It's kind of I've always, and excuse the analogy, but I've always, compared racing to cocaine. Except cocaine might be cheaper.
It might be.
It's one of the nice things about autocross. Like I said, let you describe it, because I would have kind of said it's basically we set up some traffic cones in a parking lot, and it's an obstacle course, and you try to drive through them as fast as you can. You have went much more detailed. When you go from that, I'm going to touch back and kind of pull away from your career, but autocross, and we're talking about racing. Autocross is all about car control and handling the car. I spend my days at a big 2.38 mile racetrack, and you see all kinds of things there. To me, autocross is an excellent sport or hobby to get into, where you can hang out with some really good people once a month on a Saturday or Sunday, maybe both. And for, correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, but I've always said for less than $1,000 a year, provided you have a reasonable car, I would even say my Hyundai Veloster would work. And that's just basically to buy you a set of tires for the year and maybe a set of brakes. You can go out there, you can hang out with some really good people, and you learn to drive better. And any time that you learn to drive better makes you safer on the road. So even if you're not a racer, autocross is an excellent place to help your daily education as a driver. And it's also a great stepping stone if you want to get onto the what I call the big track, or you get into road racing and stuff. Everybody progresses different. Some people autocross forever. Some people always think, "Oh, I want to get on that bigger track." But to me, autocross teaches you all those fine car control moves that you need on the big track. Might save you a car, because on autocross you really can't crash into anything. On a big track, you can hit guardrail or something and destroy your car, and it will make you a better road racer in the long run. So it's just kind of a perfect, enjoyable sport. I think if you fly fish, you spend more than $1,000 a year. With guns, you're going to spend $1,000 a year on bullets. So no matter what your
Easy.
no matter what your hobby is, you're going to spend some money. So why not have a hobby that again gets you out? You spend a day with people a couple of times a year, and actually makes you safer for you and your family and everybody else out there. Am I wrong with that
Yeah.
analogy?
Oh, no, absolutely. As far as just, and there are plenty of people that just stick with the local level and they come out on Sunday and, they have fun with their car and they have fun with other people with, a similar interest. And it usually is just a great group of people, like people just looking to have fun, get some seat time in a car and be able to drive at the limit. It definitely makes you better at car control. I can think of at least 3 situations right off the bat where I've been driving on the street and my autocross skills have saved me from an accident. As far as racing goes, or getting more seat time in a car, it's the one motorsport I would say that you can actually drive at 100% or even 110%. You go over the edge a little bit where you're not really risking bodily harm or losing your car, something bad happening. Because I've done both. I've driven on the track a little bit as well. I've been out to Barber and Atlanta Motorsports Park, and it's fun. I really enjoyed it, but you really can't go 100% without major risk. And in autocross, it's different. You can actually go 100% and realize where the limit is on your car, and you can spin and you can do all that stuff, and there's relatively low risk of something bad actually happening. You just spin your car and you're like, oh, whoops, well, that run's done, keep going. Whereas on a track, if you spin your car, you're risking either hitting a guardrail or another car running into you, or it's always a hairy situation. I think that's one of the benefits of autocross is, number one, the price in comparison to any other form of motorsport is way cheaper. An event for a local event for a day will be about $30 to $40, at least as far as the local regions I've been to. National events going to be a little bit more. It's going to be around 100, but still that's really good in comparison to anything involving a track. It's just a way that you can explore the limits of your car and your driving without astronomical risk. I really love the sport. And like I said, I have explored track and things like that, but autocross is really my favorite. So,
Before we leave the autocross, so 2012 you fell in love with Pro Solo, and 2013 I'm guessing you became accustomed to it. And then was it 2014 where you began to kind of prove you knew what you were doing, or did that actually push into take to 15 till you got there?
yeah, that's an interesting story there. So, 2012 was my first pro solo, and then 2013 I think was my first full pro solo schedule, because Dennis and I at that point had decided, okay, let's make this a thing, let's make this a priority. We're going to run a full pro solo schedule, and we're going to try to qualify for the finale and for year-end points awards and things like that. I did a few events that year. For clarification, pro solo is, there are open classes where both men and women can enter, and there are ladies classes, which obviously are ladies only. What happens with pro solo, because it's a smaller group of people, we usually have about 250 people at each event, and then the pro finale is only 250 to 300, whereas the national championships is, I think the cap for that is at 1,300 people. So pro solo is definitely a smaller group of people, so they have fewer classes. You got your street and your street touring and your prepared and your modified classes. The ladies, because there's not enough ladies to populate a ladies class for each individual open class, they've grouped them all together. And so there are three ladies classes, and they're street. Ladies 2 is the street class. Ladies 3 is the street touring class, where, more suspension modifications and some very minor engine modifications are allowed. And then ladies 1 is any car that's on race tires. So they've essentially grouped us all together. So what it ends up being is all of the best female drivers in the country all grouped into one class. And so we've joked a lot, but it's actually pretty common knowledge now that a lot of the ladies classes are actually, or at least as far as pro solo goes, are actually more competitive than the open classes. I jumped into a Shark Tank of ladies 3 the first year I was running, because I was in a street touring RX-8. Anyway, there were some really fantastic drivers in that class. I was doing fairly well at the smaller events. I would usually manage a trophy, maybe third, maybe fourth place trophy out of 10 to 15 drivers. And so I was feeling pretty good going into the pro finale that year. It's one of those humbling stories where you just have to have the right combination of driving skill and perseverance and car setup and weather and tires. And so what happened was I was sitting in either second or third going into our final set of runs. The final set of runs are always Sunday morning, and the ladies usually run first for whatever reason. But we run first, and so in Lincoln, Nebraska at about 8 a.m., it's usually pretty chilly, and it's usually kind of dry weather. So It was this particular morning, it was pretty chilly. It was probably like 55, 60 degrees, something like that. I call that chilly. We're in Alabama. There was a certain tire that year that did much better in cold weather than the ones that we were on. A whole bunch of ladies were running those tires. And this is another thing about autocross is we've got tire wars every year. So, all the tire companies compete and try to make the best tires. This particular year, there was one that did pretty well in cold weather, and it was not the one that I was on. I was driving, feeling really great about where I was. From the time I came back from my second to last run to the time I was about to take my last run, I dropped from either second or third, wherever I was, to 10th place in the class. And it really freaked me out. It really got in my head, and I wasn't able to improve on my last run. And so, that's where I ended up. And I was pretty shocked and upset because that all happened in the span of about 3 minutes. I had decided, we're not going to do that again. We're going to be ready for this the next time. And it has been a progression over the past 4 years since that happened. The next year, there were some cars that got classed into street touring along with the RX-8. I don't know if y'all remember, but the twins, the Toyota FRS and the Subaru BRZ came out, and they had classed those into Street Touring X, which kind of ended up becoming the car to have in that class. We ended up, well, Dennis sold the car, and we ended up actually racing my Celica for half of that year, which was super fun. Dennis was able to set that one up. I mean, I had the shocks and stuff, and we took it out to a few events, and he's kind of my setup guru. He set it up where it worked pretty well out on course, and we drove it that year. That year ended up being a little bit of a mixed bag because I was at a job that took up a lot of my time. So I wasn't really able to, I feel, advance my skills at all as far as 2014 goes. And then 2015 is when it really got real. We got the Subaru WRX, which we've had now for 3 years, and we just got super serious at that point. It's an excellent car for pro solo because it's all-wheel drive. You get the launch off the line, it's just super fun. In 2015, I managed to I mean, I had a decent number of points. I can't remember, I don't think I was blowing anybody away at that point, but we had like a first and a couple of seconds or thirds or something like that. And we went to the pro finale, and I did end up winning the finale that year, and I won the overall points championship, which was the first one. And then, at that point, that's when things kind of took off. That's when we were like, all right, this is a real thing now. Let's continue to improve the driving skill. Let's get good at this. And the next year, I was able to do it again. The thing that eluded me was the tournaments, which they call the challenges. So we had talked about there's the tournaments on day 2. They're called challenges. So there's the ladies challenge and there's the super challenge, which is for the open classes. Up until that point, I either rarely made the challenges, or if I made them, I usually got knocked out in the first round. It's really kind of silly, but the winner of the ladies challenge, I mean, the winner of the super and the ladies challenge both get hats. And it's got the logo on it, and then on the back it says what event it was, and ladies challenge winner or super challenge winner. I'm just gonna be super girly for a second. The ladies' hats were pink and they were adorable, and I really wanted one. Um, so I set that as a goal. I was like, all right, we're gonna have to win a ladies challenge at some point. Once I had won a year-end overall championship, I was like, all right, next step is the ladies challenge for sure. And that takes a lot of work. You actually have to, it's occasionally people get lucky and go out there and win their first challenge or whatever, but it's very rare. And most people spend time going out, getting knocked out in the first or the second round for years and years and years. You just have to get that experience at being able to go out and put down a consistent fast run on with one run, because that's what it is. You go out, you take one run, you swap sides, you take one run on the other side, and that's what determines who moves on. They just require being very consistent, a lot of practice essentially, and also working the bugs out, because you have to get used to things like if you leave too early and you red light, you're out. If you hit a cone, you're probably out. So you got to be fast, you got to be clean, you got to be consistent. And it just takes a lot of practice to get there. I think the first challenge I won was in late 2016. And to my shock, they had changed the hats for that year. And they were no longer the pink hats. And I was very upset about it, even though I had just won. So I couldn't be that upset. I told the higher ups that I really wanted to see a return of the pink hat. And they just kind of laughed and, were like, okay, whatever. I won 2 challenges that year, and then the year-end event has a challenge, and they add up the points. So depending on how you place on each of the challenges, there's an overall point system and then an overall challenge points winner at the end of the year as well. So I ended up second that year by 1 point, because I got knocked out of the final challenge I think I came in third. I got knocked out in the semifinals round. All right, now we got our next goal. But this year they actually brought back the pink hats. So obviously I had to win one. And I won 2 challenges this year. And then we had the year-end finale. That was very exciting. We had 16 ladies in the challenge, so there were 4 rounds, and each round just got progressively more difficult. The third round, I was up against another very accomplished driver in a great car that she drives very consistently. It was just a heads up round. Nobody coned, nobody red light, nobody had a red light. There was going to be no easy outs from that one. I managed to get her by like 2/10 of a second. I mean, it was super close. Moved on from that round, and then just had to watch to see who I'd be facing in the finale, or in the final round. It turns out her name's Kim. She is also incredibly accomplished driver. She's been driving for years, and just, she's one of the girls in the big league. She wins her round, and then the announcer says, well, it looks like the year-end points challenge is going to come down to this final round, because whoever wins this is the one that takes it. And it was like, oh my God, because the year before I'd come in second by 1 point, and I had, decided that wasn't going to happen again. But then to learn that it's going to all come down to the final round, that was super intense.
So
So
absolutely no stress in that situation, right?
none at all. I think I wear a little Apple Watch, and it keeps track of my heart rate. And I want to say it stopped being able to read my heart rate because it just didn't go up that high somewhere in there. But we went to the line and we both launched. I had a pretty close to a perfect reaction time, which is actually pretty rare because I try to play it safe on the lights, but there was no safe in this final round. This is, you're up against it's like the heavy metal stakes round. You're up against one of the titans of the sport. You can't leave anything on the line.
Well, in
I
theory,
I got
it's the two best people of the season, right?
Right. That's exactly what it is. Leaving nothing at the line, I think I had like a 5:39 reaction time, which a 500 is perfect. And so I'm like, all right, it's on. Let's go do this. And so I put down a run, and I come back from the first side, and Dennis is standing there, and he's screaming and he's yelling, and he's like, you win. And I was like, what? And he was like, she had a red light. And I was like, "Oh my God." And it was just like one of those moments where you're like, "Wow, is this actually happening?" So that was about 2 weeks ago at this point, I think. And the official name for the points challenge winner, you win the Fletcher Cup, because there was a woman with the last name of Fletcher, and she was implemental in getting the ladies classes, to where they are now, and especially the pro solo classes. So they named the award after her, and she was actually there to present it. And we actually are friends on Facebook, so she had been keeping up with my stuff during the year and all kinds of things. So she's really nice, and it was just a really great experience all around. So super exciting.
So you end up winning the Fletcher Cup, which, like you've said, is kind of the ladies' championship of that. So within five years, it took you to potentially from a newcomer to being on the top of the sport and achieving one of your goals as a pro solo participant. Then was it a couple of days later, while not the ultimate goal, you know in your nice, busy, relaxed life, you then trophied, I believe it was, in the overall competition or the
Yes, yeah. So, that's always the pro finale is always the weekend before national championships. So that was opening weekend. So the next goal, which I had set for myself, was that I wanted to trophy in an open class at national championships. So, and I'd actually been running open class for the last 3 years. Yeah, I started in 2015. This was my third year running an open class. The trophy had eluded me up to this point. The first year was actually by some bad luck when we were running before I got a chance to take my first run. And as is typical with Lincoln, there are sudden weather changes and monsoons that occur. So the first 15 drivers in our class got dry runs, and then the skies opened up and everyone else had totally wet runs. Really, there was no particular chance at a trophy that year, which I don't know if I would have gotten one anyway, because the competition was very stiff. It was just one of those bad luck things. I was really upset day one when I saw the rain coming down and knew that I wasn't going to get a chance at a dry run. The next year, I did not drive well on the first day of competition, and I hit cones on my first two runs, and then ended up not putting down a good run on my third run. So that was just, I didn't drive well, and was also super upset about that, because I was like, man, that was just me. That wasn't the car, that wasn't the weather. It was just, I came all the way up here, and I couldn't get it done on day ones. This year, wanted to make a run at it again, and I was starting to feel that I had a better chance, because I kind of use Dennis as my benchmark. It's several years ago, I was seconds off of him, 2 to 3 seconds consistently off of him per run, or per day. And then, over the next couple of years, it went from seconds to tenths of a second. And then this year, I actually managed to beat him at a few events, one of them being a national event. With Dennis, actually, Dennis is the reigning national champion, or he was the national champion in our class in 2016. So, I was feeling like, well, if I can on good days be able to beat the reigning national champion, then I should have a pretty good chance at a trophy. But nationals, the courses at nationals, being Lincoln, Nebraska, they're hard. Like, people spend the entire year dreaming up their courses. And so you've got little nuances that some people see and some people don't. You've got high speed sections that's really just, do you have the intestinal fortitude to be able to put your foot to the floor and hold it there and see if it sticks? There's just all kinds of room for subtle mistakes that can cost you astronomical amounts of time. So the courses at nationals are a different animal from any other courses that we see all year, but I was still feeling pretty good that I had a chance at a trophy. So first day, and we actually had the third largest class at nationals, so we had 59 or 58 or 59 competitors in our class. And so they awarded trophies out to the 16th spot, which, some people don't like, but I actually think it's a pretty good benchmark because you either get a little trophy for, anything beyond the podium that's still a trophy spot, or you get a big trophy if you get on the podium, or you get the biggest trophy if you win. I think it's a pretty good system. Some people kind of make fun of how many trophies there are, but I think it actually works pretty well because essentially the top 15% that in the class end up getting a trophy. And that's a pretty good takeaway. So anyway, after day one, I had put down some pretty good runs. It was actually the closest I'd ever been to Dennis on I was only a few tenths off of his time. There was a little bit of course dependency in our class. So some cars, like in our class, we've got the WRX, but we've also got the FRS and the BRZ, and then we've got the Camaro 2.0 liter. And that ended up being the car to have on that course because it was a course that had a lot of sweepers and a lot of high speed elements that we would have actually had to shift to third to be able, but he didn't have to. His rev limiter goes up to 67 miles an hour in second, and ours only goes up to 59. So it was those, elements where it's not really worth it to shift because you're not there long enough, but he can hold the speed without having to shift. His car ended up being the car to have for that course. The FRS and the BRZ actually did really well on that course too. And it was a challenge in a Subaru just because it doesn't really like to do sweepery things that much. It likes transitions and it likes digs out of low speed into, higher speed zones. Dennis was sitting in fifth or sixth after day one, and I was in literally the last trophy spot in 16th place. It was the best I'd ever done after a day one, so I was pretty happy with it. Going into day two, that course was more transitional. It had a lot of slaloms, it had a lot of tight turns that got you into low speed zones, so you had to, be able to accelerate quickly, things like that. It was looking like it was going to be more favorable for our car. We went out on day two. Dennis put down a pretty good first run. I think it was actually the fastest time that was had up until that point. I went out and I was actually really disappointed with my first run because when I came back, I was almost a second slower than him. And I was like, man, what is happening? And turns out I was driving too aggressively. I always think, oh, I'm a woman, I have to be more aggressive to be like the guys. And turns out in this situation, no, that was actually not the problem. Dennis and I do have a data system in the car, so we were able to look at it and kind of get a feel for where I was losing time. But he went out on his second run, he wasn't any faster. I went out on my second run. I thought the run felt pretty good, made a few mistakes, but I was like, oh, surely this is faster than my last one. It turns out it was only a tenth of a second faster. And I was like, man, I am not driving good today. I don't know what's going on. I was out of the trophies. I had almost given up at that point. I was like, man, I just don't have it today. That's just going to be the story. Well, third runs come around and Dennis went out and put down this flyer of a run. It was ridiculous. He dropped over a second from his second run, which he was already sitting pretty decently in the trophies with his, first runs. But he went out and just put down this ridiculous time. And then he comes back and I'm just celebrating. And then I was like, being that I'm usually either, beating him by a few tenths of a second or at the very least only a few tenths of the second off of him, surely I can go out there and just put down an 80% run and get within a second of his time. So that should not be a problem. And it was actually that mentality that I needed to calm down and just go out and drive well, as opposed to trying to drive super aggressive. So I went out and I took my last run, and I was aggressive in the transitional stuff, and then around the tight turns and the sweepers, I just took it easy. I 80%ed it. When I came back, I dropped over a second from my original time, and that was enough to put me actually in the 13th place trophy spot. That is how the results would stand, and I managed to get an open class trophy this year, and it was excellent. So, goal accomplished. I felt like I did learn a lot at that particular, especially on that course. Just a lot of learning to be done. And, luckily I got to take home a trophy out of it.
And when you're talking at that event, picking up a second a run, a tenth of a second a run, you were looking at times in the high 50, 60 seconds. So a second is a significant amount of or time when you're looking at what you said, 59 entrants, and say 60 seconds to do a lap or a course to do the course. And a second is, like I said, a significant amount. Am I not wrong that
Yeah.
when you're dealing with tenths and hundredths of a second, I think, between the places?
Oh yeah. There were several classes that the top, 5 positions were determined by a tenth of a second. So, when you say, because this course that I was just talking about, it was about 60, depending on what kind of car you have, 60 to 63 second course. And at that point, like Dennis had run a 62.6, and then on his third run, he came back with a 61.5, which is astronomical. And that was good enough to put him in second. The guy that had the Camaro, he's a really good driver, but he just had too much of a lead from day one for Dennis to be able to make it up on day two. But I mean, really, that was a flyer of a run. I looked at that, and I was actually sitting on a 63.7. So I looked at a 61.5 that Dennis had just run, and I was like, man, surely I can get into the 62s. Like, without, like, this shouldn't be that much of an effort to get into the 62s. And so that was the mentality I needed, honestly. So I ended up with a 62.8. And so that was good enough. But yeah, it's, when you're talking dropping a second, I mean, even dropping half a second is pretty huge. So, dropping a second is just like almost unheard of when you get into second and third runs. And there it was. So
And you seem to have such a, good, I want to say good attitude about it. Again, in 5 years, you've managed to hit these career goals. And again, as I say, you seem to be so much more accomplished at your young age compared to good old elderly me. And that I can't even see 5 years ahead to pay off a car loan, and you're racing cars for 3 years and setting these goals. And I know discussing the interview in advance over text message, you have this knack that to look at everything very positively. Even the Camaro that Dennis had trouble with, and you said was the car to beat, that car was a driving force for both of you. And instead of looking at it and complaining and bitching about, oh, it doesn't have to shift and we've got to shift this extra time. I'm assuming some of the FRSs and that might have even been flappy paddle gearboxes, which might aid them in a higher speed course like that. I don't know if that's true or not. You guys were able to look at it as just a goal and a thing to improve upon, and this is the equipment you have, and you're not gonna make excuses. You're gonna face the music and do the best with what you have. And did Dennis finish second and you finished 13th in a group of 60 people when you had thought that the day was over, and he probably would. I don't know where he was before he did that additional second run, but he probably bottom of the tens, and maybe even the teens.
Yeah, yeah,
So
he was off the podium for sure. I can't remember exactly where, but like seventh or something like that.
I guess it's that never give up, and like I said, you and then you talked about the next year and the next year, these small little goals, and taking these baby steps to get across the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to that's something that I really think has helped us. Like, number one is just all about attitude. And I'm a huge advocate for women getting into the sport. And, there's been a lot said about ladies' classes and, oh, there's no reason women should need their own class because, it doesn't require any particular amount of strength or anything like that. It is something that is about attitude. And I think that actually helps is, having the ladies classes, I think it helps improve the attitude, having other women around you that are, supportive and like-minded and, it's just it's kind of a camaraderie thing.
I'm
But
sure.
you will
Go ahead.
classically see, yeah, you will classically I mean, there are classes where the women are running times fairly close to the open class, but at the same time they're not. And I've always wanted to figure out why that is. And I honestly think it all comes down to the mentality. People will rise to the occasion that they are presented with. You are up against, say 5 to 10 women in a ladies class versus 60 people in an open class. Necessity to get out there and get it done is not always there unless you've got, like in the pro solo ladies classes, 10 national champions all running together. So, you end up having to rise to the occasion and you get uh very competitive with that. And it just all becomes about mentality. So it's all things being equal, people will rise to the occasion that they are given. And that is what we were also dealing with the car. As far as the Camaro goes, it was like I said, it was the car to have on that course. That doesn't mean, you give up. He can have a bad day. He can, hit a cone on his fastest run. Like all kinds of things can happen. It's not just about the car. It's about everything. It's about the whole package. I feel like I've always heard people after they don't do as well as they wanted to in a particular, event. And sometimes it just sounds like an excuse. I don't want excuses. I just want to get better as a driver. And the same goes for Dennis. Like we have both set this goal of just becoming the best drivers that we can be. Everything else becomes kind of irrelevant at that point. Yeah, you can say a lot about the Camaro being better than the WRX or whatever you want to say, but ultimately we are fine with it being there as well as the FRSs because everybody thought when the FRS and the BRZ got put into our class, they were like, well, that's a class killer. It's just going to be a spec FRS class. The WRX is done for. After a few national events, we kind of proved that wrong. They actually, oddly enough, there's a little bit course dependency, but they end up being pretty competitive with each other. But at the same time, it's like, well, that'll just make us better drivers. If we have to go out and compete with something that's maybe a little bit better than our car, then that just, like I said, people will rise to the occasion. And it's about, most of the time, it becomes about who was the better driver on that day as opposed to who had the better car. All things being equal, we can't beat the Camaro. It's okay because we are being driven to try to, and that's what makes us better. And so now that because for a while, Dennis's first national championship was last year in 2016. And so that was kind of a plaguing monkey on his back until that point. So he won that last year, and that was huge. And then this year, or at least the past 3 years, I've been trying to get this open class national trophy. And now that's kind of a goal we've achieved, we both have our most immediate monkeys off our back. And so it kind of opens up our opportunity to just compete and try to get better and try to improve our skills, until the next challenge comes along. And I know we've talked about this, but my ultimate goal is to be a national champion in an open class. The only way I'm going to get there is if I'm being challenged to improve my driving skills, because it is hard to win an open class national championship. I'm not at that point yet, but the only way I'm going to get there is if I'm challenged to improve my driving skill and really analyze my driving and just continue to move forward. So that's kind of I'm not going to set a time limit, but if we were speaking in generalizations, that would be like a 10 or 20-year goal. And so in that amount of time, you kind of just have to challenge yourself as much as possible and try to rise to the occasion and learn, adapt and adjust and figure out how to become the best driver you can. And so that's where we are, no excuses, no, oh, this car's better than mine or anything like that. You're not going to change if you're not challenged. And that's kind of what's been driving me and Dennis ever since day one. Just having a good attitude about it. Ultimately, it's about having fun. Like, this is something we do for fun, and so many people get so serious about, I mean, that goes for any hobby, like people just get really serious about it and it stops being fun to them. And, Dennis and I, we like to try to keep the attitude going. I think that's what's made us so resilient as far as like, oh, final runs, we've got to be able to put down this best one. If you make it into a thing, if you make it into a stressful pressure situation, you're more likely to make mistakes. Whereas we play music and grid and we dance around and we just try to have fun with it. And I think it reminds you of the overall reason you're there. It's to have fun, and it kind of decreases all the pressure and it lets you be able to go out and, make a run that you need in a pressure situation, because you haven't psyched yourself out essentially. You're still having fun, you still have a good attitude. So it's pretty much the tenet of nationals, I think.
You had three really good points in your last statements, in that you open talking about the ladies classes, and people say that the ladies classes don't need to exist. And while I can sit here and say no, they don't need to exist, and you should go out there, everybody wants equal rights, and let's look at them as equals. I think that the biggest advantage of the ladies classes is it gets the ladies out there, because to me it could be intimidating having a bunch of guys
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
not knowing their motives. I mean, you're a attractive person, and you've got to always wonder, are they being nice to me because you're cute, or are they being nice to me because of my talent? And it's kind of like being the billionaire bachelor. Are women going out with me because I have $1 billion, or because I'm a nice guy? And the ladies classes really help get people comfortable and see the success, and you can work together and mentor people a little bit better with the honesty there, and prove yourselves. And I really think that's part of the challenge of women in racing. I've spent time talking to Denise McCluggage and Lynn St. James and that over the years, and while they don't really say it, they do admit that there's challenges. And I think you've even seen it with some of the more recent women drivers in professional sports and IndyCar racing and such. So I think they need to be there if it's going to stay a multi-sex adventure. And there's no reason that girls shouldn't go out there and do it. I've alluded to the 13-year-old stepdaughter. If she wanted to go out there and start autocrossing, you'd be one of the first people I'd call because
Hmm.
she would be much more comfortable with you. It's the same,
Right.
and like
Yeah.
you said with the guns, if she wanted to start learning to shoot, if you were a little bit closer, you would be somebody I would give a call to because she's not going to take well to an overbearing, and I don't mean to be mean or insulting, but an overbearing Marine or a police officer or somebody teaching her.
Hmm.
She's going to feel intimidated where somebody's nice and seems to see the same things and relate to the same things. You know,
It's a different thing because there's things that women commonly have concerns about, and there's things men commonly have concerns about. And trying to, some women do well with male instructors, but at the same time, I feel like female instructors kind of understand the more common concerns that females have, whether it be, shooting guns or racing cars or whatever it is, things that are, especially things that require adrenaline and a little bit of aggression and things like that. If you have a female that has overcome those challenges, they can definitely be more facilitative, or of helping another woman with those challenges. Whereas a lot of guys, they have different challenges, and so they're trying to explain it in a way, oh, well, you've got to do this and this and this, and it's not connecting. It's just two different ways of thinking about a problem. I totally support the ladies classes. And we may come to a point in the next 10, 20, 30 years where the gender gap is not as pronounced. Especially since the way that children are raised is being looked at. On my social media all the time, I see, even though I don't have children of my own, I see a lot of articles about not gender biasing children and things like that. And you're like, wow, that's an interesting thing. And I'll read it just out of intellectual curiosity. But I think we are trending in a way that there's not going to be so much biasing between girls and boys, and them developing into men and women. It's going to be a little more, equal. So, in 10, 20, 30 years, we may not be in a situation where we need ladies' classes anymore. But I've always thought if we got to that point, they would just end up phasing themselves out. We don't have to actively work on that. And for right now, they are definitely important in what we have. It's the way I've met all the other ladies that I race against, and we're all like-minded and we all enjoy the same thing, and it's like a little community, and we support each other, and it's really just camaraderie, mentorship, all those good things that come into it. And SCCA now is actually working on kind of a women's initiative to figure out, how can we attract more women to the sport, because it is a male dominated sport. So, and a lot of women just don't know about it, honestly. A lot of women end up there because the boyfriend or significant other or their spouse told them about it and, dragged them out there with them or something. I got into it, a male friend of mine had told me about it, but I went out there on my own. But that's some women, but it's not all of them. And it's hard for women to get into the sport because even if they know about it, there's still all those questions of, oh, well, am I going to be patronized? Am I going to be, you know, hit on? Like, what's going to happen when I go out there? Am I going to get made fun of if I do something not within the realm of what people normally do, all those questions. And with the ladies' classes, you don't really have to worry about that so much. You got other women and you can kind of confide in them and be like, hey, will you come ride with me? And then, it's kind of like, we can just help each other. The women's initiative that they're getting together is actually going to be, hopefully in the next year or two, kind of a national thing. And there may be some women's only autocross schools and things like that. So, that would be pretty awesome, I think. But just, an interesting thing to look at and watch for in the future.
I'm taking that as you're saying a year or two off because you want to be an instructor, and by then maybe your doctorate will be out of the way, or your and
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
be an instructor. You
Oh
at some
man, yeah,
point
I know.
something in your schedule has to give. I mean, we've chatted an hour and 10 minutes or so about autocrossing and that, and never even touched on some of the other kind of fascinating things you do. Of course, this is a collector car focused or a car focused podcast. So I think you've provided a good insight into some of the excitement you've had, especially in the last 5 years of your pro solo development, and a little bit about the autocross and the SCCA. And hopefully some of our listeners, if they haven't tried it, will go ahead and Google and find out where their local SCCA chapter is, and maybe cruise on out and hopefully something that's a little bit sporty. SUVs don't autocross well, I guess. Now we're in the world of Evokes and Trackhawks and Durango SRTs, and don't know how those are going to pan out over the future. But I really enjoyed doing it, but it's just, again, I get into things, and I I'm guilty of the problem you were stating, is that I get a hobby, and then to get my hobby better, I start to get more and more and more serious about it. And it happens with my woodworking. It happens with my cigar hobby, and I'm almost getting into it with my podcasting hobby. This is supposed to be a hobby, but I keep getting too serious on it. And Will and Derek kind of keep me in check that, hey, you've got to enjoy this, and it's supposed to be a getaway, and it gets me talking to people. So you're even a good reminder on that. And in typical, I want to say, no driving gloves fashion, we're about 8 or 9 minutes beyond where you brought it up. We always rotate back around to something said in the beginning, and you were talking about, basically you and Dennis, and focusing on improving the driver and the car control, and that all becomes very important in autocross because, as you said when you were going over the rules, if you hit a cone, knock it out of its box, knock it over, it's 2 seconds. So if the person in that seat isn't good, your run's no good. So
Hmm.
you've got to know how close you can clip that cone, how you can brush that cone, and figure out those lines. And racing, I've come to learn, is very, very mental in, as you said, focusing, and just the knowledge of walking the track and seeing and taking notes as you do it mentally, and knowing what to look for and what this little gravel patch is going to do. So
Hmm.
I want to say I do thank you for taking so much time this evening, chatting and talking about your autocross. I know the Fletcher Cup was very important to you, and trophying, and I learned a little bit more insight about your career, and I picked up a few things tonight, so I hope our listeners did. And did you have anything you wanted to wrap up with, or say hi to anybody, or
No, I don't think so. Thanks for having me on. And I mean, I guess if we're gonna do like thank you things, I do have to thank Dennis because he's the reason that, it's become what it is to me, or at least most of the reason. I started off and it was kind of a fun hobby, and then it was really that, one event in, 2012, when I really got into it with the pro solo. We actually had a team, quote unquote, at that time. It was like four of us, one being his son and another lady named Laura. And after that, it just kind of evolved. I just have to give a lot of credit to him for, being a partner and getting to where we are, and, having as good of an attitude as he does so that we can have a great attitude together. But, other than
you
that,
two seem to be really good together. And if you really think back, that one event in 2012 has affected you in all aspects of your life. You do say the autocross is a hobby, but you ended up with what appears to be a very good partner out of it in life and the adventures, and he seems to be encouraging in all aspects of your hobby. I know you recently sold your home to move back to Auburn to complete your
Oh
doctorate and
yeah.
going back to going back to going back to college after having, you seem to have a pretty successful career and taking that risk. And I know he lives a little bit of a distance from you, and he's traveling, he travels to see you, and you do the same. So, it's
Yeah.
it's one of those things that, you never know what happens, and you spend a weekend somewhere, and it's, created a pretty good life, I think, for you.
Yeah. Yeah. We actually didn't even start dating until quite a bit later. Even just as a teammate, he was very supportive and just really helpful as far as like improving driving and being accommodating. I had to get picked up from the airport a few times because work schedule, I had to fly in instead of drive up there and stuff like that. Just teammate stuff in general, and then especially dating, you got to have a supportive partner, and that even goes for people that have spouses that don't autocross. If that's going to be a thing in your life, they they have to be supportive, because it will become a time commitment. So and
It's all
most of the people
It's
that I
always nice
autocross.
when they chat with you, or you're able to communicate, whether it be autocrossing or shooting guns or
Oh
woodworking
yeah.
or podcasting or whatever it is. It's always nice to go in and sit down with your companion and have a conversation about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And a lot of the people we autocross with, a lot of their spouses come out, and a lot of husband wife teams, a lot of boyfriend girlfriend teams. Anyone that, they don't have someone that they autocross with, they're always very thankful. And you always see it on Facebook. Thanks to my wife for letting me come do this, or even thanks to my husband for, letting me go for a week and just race cars in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's definitely essential, but I love it when you see couples out there together, because that's just team building 101 right there. I mean, I think anybody that autocrosses together is going to be stronger for it. So
Well, I think we'll leave it on those high notes there. We're an hour 20 in. It gets a little bit long, and we'll do a little bit of editing. But I do thank you for the time tonight, Jordan, and hopefully we can convince you to email me or give me permission to steal some pictures so that we can at least
sure thing.
show you in action with with
Yeah.
at least the car. I know I'll dig up one of the old Caterham days or day. And
We've got a few of those pictures, yeah.
so again, thank you, and we'll wrap it up, and we'll talk to No Driving Gloves listeners in about a week.
Sounds great. Thank
Thanks.
you.